الذنوب بريدة للكفر. The scholars, they have a saying, they said sin is the gateway to kufr, to disbelief. Meaning that for each sin, that sin opens up a door for another sin. And then that sin opens up the door for another sin, and another sin, and another sin, until eventually the person arrives at the door of kufr, of disbelief. But then you've gone so far in your sins that you can't even realize, you don't even realize that you have now arrived, at kufr. You're standing on it. You don't even realize. But they're gateways. All right, they open up the door. One thing opens up the door. So when we started talking about YOLO. You only live once, this concept. And then we started talking about the origin of the concept and how the disbelievers of Quraysh, they didn't believe in resurrection. So when you don't believe in resurrection, that means that you don't have a concept of divine consequences, accountability, which means that opens up the door for you to engage in behaviors at your own will, because you don't believe that there is a such thing as divine accountability. And if you don't believe there's a such thing as divine accountability, and you engage your desires, unrestrictedly, then that means that now there's a level of impulsivity there. And there is a level of, divinity that you have attached to your desires by default, that you obey your desires unrestrictedly. Whatever you feel like doing, that's what you do. So one thing has now opened up a door for another thing. And now you have this is where we are now with the, taking your desires as your God besides Allah. This feel-good environment, whatever feels good. And you have Muslims, who even engage in the same behavior. It feels good, I'm just going to do it. And of course, this breeds narcissism. This breeds sociopathic behavior. Because in doing that, in engaging your desires unrestrictedly, you have to know that you are going to infringe on other people in doing that. But then now you have a choice. Do you care enough about other people's feelings to be mindful of your self-indulgent behavior? Or do you not care about how you offend people and how you affect people, and you give in to your self-indulgence? And that's usually what people do. They give in to the self-indulgence, and they could care less how it affects other people. That is what creates the narcissistic behavior, the sociopathic behavior. You got to see how all of these things are connected. They're not isolated incidents. They're all connected. One thing is opening the door for another thing. And then, of course, in the era of narcissism, there's an increase of materialism. There's an increase of entitlement. There's an increase of self-promotion. There's an increase of self-admiration, self-aggrandizement. And the Prophet ﷺ prophesied that this time would come. He prophesied that this time would come, where a person would always self-promote, self-aggrandize. You're larger than life. You have people now who they got a PhD. You can't tell them anything. You got a master's degree. You can't tell them anything. You have a master's degree in a specific science, in a specific field. That doesn't mean you are the master of the world. You know what I mean? Like, you mastered a particular field, a particular science, a field in a particular science. That doesn't mean that you mastered the world, but you let people with these degrees tell it, they got it all figured out. But there's a sense of entitlement. There's a sense of materialism. There's a sense of self-promotion. You promoting yourself. There's a sense of self-admiration, right? And the Prophet ﷺ prophesied this. He said, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمْ شُحًّا مُطَاعًا وَهَوًا مُتَّبَعًا وَإِعْجَابَ كُلِّ ذِي رَأْيٍ بِرَأْيِهِ وَالدُّنْيَا مُؤْثِرًا فَعَلَيْكَ بِخَاصَةِ نَفْسِكَ. He said, when you see the time come upon you, when you see the time come upon you where you see shuh and muta', shuh yani is a stinginess, where people, what he's saying is that stinginess, greed becomes the marker that dictates human behavior. Stinginess, greed, it dictates human behavior. So because I'm greedy, I want all of this to myself, I'm stingy, I don't want to share with anybody, that triggers a certain behavior. All right. And this is why you have tax breaks for the wealthy, the rich. Meanwhile, they're cutting you a stimulus check for $1,200. You know what I mean? Like, they're cutting you a stimulus check for $1,200, which you spend with one bill. And then, you know, big corporations like Target and other big corporations are getting millions of dollars stimulus checks. You understand what I'm saying? You follow me? This is like shuh and muta'. This is stinginess, greediness on levels that you can't even imagine. Wa hawan muttaba', where a person would follow unrestrictedly their desires. Here again, you will find extreme greediness and stinginess. You will find people following their desires unrestrictedly. There was a time when a person desired to do something, but they feared the social consequences. They feared the familial consequences. They feared even divine consequences. And in today's time, including Muslims, have no fear of consequences. Many Muslims engage in haram behavior and post it on social media. And as the Prophet ﷺ said that, you know, إِذَا لَمْ يَسْتَحْيِ فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ, that the moment you lose all sense of haya, you know, this moral restraint, you know, the moment you lose, not shyness, moral integrity, not shyness. Shyness is a natural component that human beings are usually created with. And then because of our environments and the things that we are exposed to, we kind of loosen up. What I'm talking about is this boldness that I'm going to sin in public. I'll post it on social media and I dare somebody to say something about it. That's not shyness. That's, you have lost all sense of moral integrity. You've lost all sense of moral integrity. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا لَمْ يَسْتَحْيِ فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. The moment you lose sense of your moral integrity, you will do as you please. You will do. That's one of the interpretations of the hadith. You will do as you please because you don't have any moral restraint. You will do as you please because you don't have any moral restraint. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. You understand? He says, so when you see extreme stinginess and greediness, and you see hawan muttaba', people following unrestrictedly their desires, your desire has become your God. Your desires has become your God. How do you pronounce that? Hedonism? Is that how it's pronounced? Okay. Everything feels good is right. Everything that feels bad is wrong. Your desire, that has now become your God. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Don't you see the one who has taken his desires as his God besides Allah? He said, وَإِعْجَابْ كُلِّ ذِي رَأْيٍ بِرَأْيِهِ, where a person now becomes, you know, amazed with his own opinions. Malignant self-love. Narcissism. He's spelling it out for us. It's our responsibility to decode it based upon the time that we're living in. He's talking about narcissism. إِعْجَابْ كُلِّ ذِي رَأْيٍ بِرَأْيِهِ, where a person becomes opinionated and becomes amazed with his own opinions. Self-aggrandizement. Malignant self-love. Narcissism. Where your opinion is the only opinion. Your opinion matters above all else. You know. And even as it goes back to hawan muttaba', following your desires unrestrictedly, you think about, the concept that was taken from, what's his name? The one who wrote the quote, "Do what thou wilt." I'm forgetting, his name is slipping my mind. Jay-Z had on the shirt, "Do what thou wilt." That's a quote from, yes, it was on Jay-Z's shirt. Yes. I'm forgetting the guy's name. His name is slipping my mind right now. But yeah, they take a page out of his book, "Do what thou wilt." And the rest of the quote is, "What thou wilt will be the whole of the law." Here again, your desires become God. Aleister Crowley is his name. Right, Aleister Crowley. Yeah, absolutely. So here again, speaking to that environment where, what you will, your desire becomes the law. Person becomes so amazed with his own opinions. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Dunya mu'thira," where dunya, the worldly life, the materialism of the world, takes precedent over everything else, over deen, over everything. It's all about work, acquiring, amassing, materialism. He said, when you start seeing this time, فَعَلَيْكَ بِخَاصَةِ نَفْسِكَ, he said, then focus on yourself. Because the people, when you start to see this prevalent amongst people, these qualities prevalent amongst people, the people are gone. That doesn't mean for leaders to stop preaching Islam, but for the lay people to put more concentration on yourself at that point, right? To concentrate more on yourself.